when I was told that colonialism benefited me as an African, and with this understanding, I realized that that's not true. Yes, colonialism generated some benefit, but the benefit was not for me as an African. It benefited Europeans, it benefited white folks, and so to insert Europeans' benefit as my benefit, it's white supremacy. So everything that is white then is for my good.
The conversation we're gonna have today is gonna be amazing. So make sure you stay tuned. Yo, what's up, everybody? It's your man, Tim Swain. Listen, I'm telling you, I am absolutely positively excited. You need to watch this entire video. Let me tell you why. I have Dr. Eric Kyere, assistant professor of social work. He's an adjunct professor in Africana studies at Indiana University. And his work really focuses on racism and how it impacts the African diaspora. And his work particularly is on how can we disrupt it? How can we reimagine a decolonized society, an anti-racist society? The conversation we're going to have today is going to be amazing. So make sure you stay tuned. Eric Kyere, it's so great to have you today. I appreciate your time today. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Brother Tim, for having me. And thank you for all the good work you've been doing.
Yeah, so, we've been knowing each other for a while. I think we met at church a while ago. And to be honest with you, you were one of the first Ghanaians that I met that understood about structural racism and all of this stuff, and even just kind of understood the plight of Africans in the diaspora and African Americans. And that stood out with me so much because the more I got to know you, the more I said, man, this guy's really, he's not just giving lip service, but his work actually backs up what he believes in, his convictions. And that was really encouraging and inspiring to me. And I want to get more into that story. But before we do that, can you just do me a favor and introduce yourself for the people? Maybe if there's something I left out, just talk a little bit about maybe where you're from, and then, how you ended up in the U.S.
Yeah, hi, everyone. As Tim said, my name is Eric Kyere. I've been in the U.S. Since 2008. So I'm from Ghana. I am from Winchi. So, I went, that's where I had my high school education, and then I went to University of Ghana, and then I came here in the state for my master's, and after that, I went on to do my PhD, and now I'm in Indianapolis, I think, yeah. So actually, I met you, right? The first time I came here was in 2017. That was right in the fall of that same year. That was where you guys had come from Ghana, and then I met you in New Era Church.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that you had just came to Indiana around that time.
Yeah, because I'm moving in July 31st. And so I came to the church that was in August or September, day around, and that was when you guys had returned from Ghana.
Wow, you know what? That's right, because I think that was around our second trip or something like that. That's amazing. And when we met, I think we just hit it off just because we had similar passions, being people of faith, and really wanting to see that faith translated into practical ways that we can help empower people, I think was the real thing that connected us. And so you shared a little bit about your educational journey. Now, let's talk a little bit about your journey from Ghana to the US, because there's so many people, especially when they see you as a Ghanaian, they say, this guy has made it, right? So all this racism stuff that we're going to get into later, he should have went there. He should have just enjoyed his life, got a good job, moved into a great community, and stayed out of trouble. Yeah. So let's talk about your transition from Ghana to the US. how was it initially, and how did you even get interested in these issues around the diaspora affairs, anti-racism, decolonization, and what may have you?
I mean, I think it's a long thing. I mean, maybe at some point, I think I'm gonna have to write a book, but because of the time in here, I'm gonna try to condense it. But yeah, frankly, I think when I first came here in 2008, the first year I didn't start my master's. A whole lot of things. That's another conversation that made me live in New York for about a year, and there, the experience that I had, I observed people, and I remember one day, I was staying with a woman that I because of how I had to take a detour, and I had these kids, and that apartment where we lived, there were these kids. They were actually the parents were from Senegal, and they were walking around, and then one had said something, then a lady said, "Oh, somebody had cursed out somebody." And then these kids who were of the African family said, "No, that's not us, it's the welfare kids who behave that way." And I don't know what that means. That's like it was a code word for Black kids, And I didn't understand. And then I had no concept of even the idea of race and stuff. I think it wasn't that I had no concept. I had the experience were there, but I think I didn't have the concept, the vernacular, the language to actually put it in there. And so the way I was seeing it, and so it made me look like colorblind, but you are here, you're coming to look for opportunity, and you have to focus on that, and so, and at the time, because of some of the stuff that I was going through, people thought, well, even the school, forget it, and all kinds of stuff. But the long story short, God being gracious, I stayed in the line, and I said that was my focus, why I came here. And I ended up, after a year, I started my master's. So I moved out of New York to Kutztown in Pennsylvania, and I had my master's. I think there, I really didn't see anything wrong. But what I remember was that the place was beautiful. Yes, because I like greens and all kinds of stuff. See the place, but it was all white. And even in my school at the time, my program was good. My master's program, it was great, but I didn't see a lot of Black folks. And then few Black folks that I saw even on campus, I wouldn't go near them, because I think at the time, the way I was made, I came here, and the kind of the message that I got, that Blacks, particularly African Americans, are people you don't go near them, So I to myself, and then, but I will oftentimes like to be in white spaces. And the school too was predominantly white. And I didn't even know that place was designed, it's a county, so it's a country area. So it's very white. And I didn't know, now I know that the place is designed to make it inhabitable for Black folks in particular. It's been there for years. So, but fast forward that I finished my master's, and I work in first all white schools. Most of the kids at that time had not even seen somebody. So I remember sometimes during lunchtime, I go in there, and some of these kids will come around me, looking at me some weird way. Where's this dude coming from? And I had no idea. But I think what I observed in that school, all white school, the schools were resource-wise, they were in good shape, because I work in different schools in Lebanon County and stuff. And I could see sometimes some of the schools, even when the kids have special needs, like high need areas, sometimes I'll be in a class and they have maybe 4 students, but they had all these resources, and even they had teachers' aid and other logistics. And some of the rooms, actually, some of them have these nice buildings where if student was having a bad day, they could just go in there, save. And if you're a teacher or somebody, you could stand outside because it was all transparent. So you could see what's happening. So when the kids calm down, they can come and then get themselves reorganized and get back into the classroom. And then one of the things that I observed too during those spaces, during time, most of those kids live in two-parent household. But there were also some communities, some of the families, they were white, but they were poor. One of the things, because it shocked me when I was coming, because of what I have made to know, that's like almost like every white person was rich, but some of them were not the way I thought. But I did that work for some time, and then I moved to Philadelphia. So Philadelphia was where working, I began to, I was working in the child welfare system, but I also worked in the schools. So in Philly, I went to schools, and most of them were predominantly Blacks. And then it was there that I started working with Black families, and experiences were different compared to the ones that I worked with before I moved to Philadelphia. And I remember one of the things that is still, I think, core of some of the why I do what I do was, and there were this particular school, sometimes some of these kids were having some meltdown and other issues. And then you will have some of the teachers, sometimes even some of my own colleagues that I was working with, behavior specialists, they would say, oh, this guy, by the time he is 16, 15, you're going to go to jail. And some could talk about who in this child family is likely to go to jail, who is about to come out of jail, and all of those kinds of stuff. And then the other thing too that I observed was the fact that a lot of these kids, sometimes their learning time, they didn't have enough learning time in the classroom because of teacher management issues. So a lot of those teachers, interestingly, were most of the time white women who sometimes it was difficult in managing the student. But one of the things that actually brought a lot of the disruptions in the classroom was that sometimes some of these kids say, if somebody would say something bad against your aunt or your brother or your cousin, and so this one will go up in defense of the family member, this one is trying to curse, trying to disgrace. And so that will bring in the disruptions and stuff. And then sometimes I will watch some of these kids who were not engaged in those things. They will be just sitting down by themselves. They are losing learning time. So then in the end, all of these kids, when it comes and they're not doing that well, people call it achievement gap and say, oh, these Black kids are not doing well. They are trailing white kids. And it makes it look like intellectually, these kids, they have something, there's something wrong with them that need to be fixed. And even at the time, I didn't really make sense of all of these issues. So at some point, before I started my PhD, I had another master's in public administration. So I didn't actually graduate from that before I left for the PhD. But through that, I happened to evaluate one program in one of the YMC in Berks County in Pennsylvania, where I was at the time. So I went to the directors of the program. They call it a program where they're designing to help minority families, like Black and brown kids and families, and then low-income families, to help prepare their children for school readiness. And it's part of initiative to meet, address the achievement gap. So when she said the achievement gap, and I said, well, I think from what I've been observing in schools, both in the school that were predominantly white kids, and then the schools that were mostly Blacks in Philadelphia, and some of the things that I'm seeing, I don't think this is an achievement gap. And at that time, I didn't even know there's a whole lot of body, around these work that some are calling this opportunity gap, educational debt, and all kinds of stuff. But what I told the woman, I remember I said, well, from what I saw, it's just simple. If you cook, you connect your input, you look at the throughput, and you look at the output. For me, I don't think this is an achievement gap. It's not a surprising thing because a lot of these kids are missing learning time. They are also not getting the right resources that are important for them. And so when you measure their output by the kinds of the input in terms of the resources and the opportunities and the learning time that they are actually getting whilst in school, this is not an achievement gap, it's a reflection. So, fast forward that when I started my PhD, that was when a lot of these things began to come in. And all of these, I had not really thought of race because I had any concept about race. And I was just like off. And so I would just look at this issue just like anyone else's will think about them. Okay. So I remember when I started my PhD, I began to write about why was that there were a lot of, for the African-American families that I saw in Philadelphia, the children, why was it that a lot of the times, sometimes when there was an issue and you call home, you will all see maybe the mom or mother and stuff. And so I wanted to understand what is the reason behind the pronounced single motherhood, I think within the Black families. So I began to do some work. And I think as I was reviewing the literature about the single motherhood, it was way off. I look at the married pool and stuff and why. And then that was when slavery came up. And then structural racism came out. And then reading those kinds of pieces, they made sense. But then I also realized the slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, and how African societies, and Ghana in particular was key to that. Now, I grew up in Ghana. I know in some areas, some people probably might have thought about that, but for me, when I went to school, right from my elementary, middle school, even through the university, slavery or transatlantic slave trade was not something that was part of my curriculum. So by the time I was here, I've been to Cape Coast before I came here, but I never visited the slave dungeons, and I had no concept. I was taught, about colonialism. I remember in high school, we did government. So we were told, and even with that, we were told about the advantages and disadvantages of colonialism. And oftentimes the narratives were so much on how colonialism brought us civilization, Christianity, development, and all of those things. And so I came in and at the time didn't make any connection. But once I began to read this literature to understand the experiences of these Black children and the Black families, and then when slavery came in, then all these things and the connection to Africa and then to Ghana, I think that was the first time I began to see, there were a lot of things I didn't get. So I remember one time I was sitting down and I was reading one particular article that were the kids, and one of the boys was talking about this. I still remember that quote because as I was reading that thing, like it was like tears were coming out of my eyes because it connected me to the children that I was seeing in Philadelphia schools. So this kid, he had this quote. It was a qualitative study. So one of the high school was writing, saying that, well, we wake up every day, we tell ourselves we are gifted, we are talented, we are smart, we can do this. But we come into the school and we have all these teachers, all these principals who, because of where we come from, how we dress and how we look like, are telling us we will not amount to anything. We are nothing, we are this. And then he said, we're just pulling in one direction and they're pulling us in the other one. Then he said, it's like a tug of war on our mind. I read that paper in 2014, but I still remember the quote. The title of the paper was the same. He said, the tug of war on our mind. And it's so I look at that and then as I was also understanding from the literature how slavery, um, now with mass incarceration and its impact on family structure of the Black community. Then at the same time, I was the first time in Pittsburgh, I think after 5 years of being here, I started going to church in Black neighborhood. And so there, as I served as a children and youth minister. So one of the things that also became very, I think, a striking thing for me was when these kids will come to church, after church, and I'll ask them, what's your prayer request? I pray a lot. And then so I talk about prayer. And they will say, pray for my aunt, pray for my mom, pray for my dad, pray for my cousin and stuff. And this was consistently the message. So I said, wow, these kids think about each other just like I think about my uncles, my brothers, my sisters, my mom, and those even back in Ghana. That's how I think about them all the time. So I began to say, so what happened when these kids are young? The way they are thinking and how they're doing, I don't see any difference from my experience culturally. And what was interesting at the time, I was reading a book by one professor, Janice Hale. And in that book was titled Black Children, Their Culture, Their Root, Their Culture, and Their Learning Style. And I remember one of the things that she said was that Black folks or Africans, their culture is in their soul. And then she said, when the white man captured them, they took over their body, but they couldn't take over their soul. And the culture is inherent. It's in the soul. So connecting that to how some of these kids in the Philadelphia school will, they will get into trouble in defense of their brothers, their sisters, or their family members. And then seeing how these other kids are also in the church context, their prayer requests are all about people in their lives. And then thinking about myself and now knowing about slavery. So that was when I asked the question to myself. I said, so what is the probability? If slavery didn't happen, what is the probability that the next Black person I am meeting here or encountering here could have been my uncle, my mom, my brother, my sister, or my dad? And I didn't know that probability, but I said, what if that is as high as I could imagine? How will that shape my relationship with African Americans? Where most of the things began to take shape. And so right quickly, that brought me into a different space. And I began to say, okay, I think I know what I want to do. Prior to that, I had been focused a lot on families and children. I like families and policies and initiative, but issues of race and racism were not part of those conversations and how I was thinking. But so then I made a decision. I said, I'm going to dig more into Blacks, Africans, and my research is going to focus on that area. So that was where a lot of these things began to make sense. And then I had to spend a whole lot of time because I realized this was a very complicated and nuanced issue. And so that was actually in 2014 was when I finally found out that actually this is what I want to do. And so that's how my journey towards, structural racism, anti-racism, decolonial framework, and all of those things, started. But one of the things that it brought me into was I began to question my education and socialization in Ghana. Like I told you, when I was told that colonialism benefited me as an African, and with this understanding, I realized that that's not true. Yes, colonialism generated some benefit, but the benefit was not for me as an African. It benefited Europeans, it benefited white folks, and so to insert Europeans' benefit as my benefit, it's white supremacy. So everything that is white then is for my good. But when I realized this, I tell people, I say, imagine this, you know, you have your in your room or your house, and thieves broke in. They came in through a window. They broke into your window and came in whilst you were asleep. And, you know, ransacked your place. They stole all what you had. So you woke up and in your confused state, you walk out through the same window that they came into your room. How does that benefit you? That door that they open, that now you are walking out to go because you're so confused and you're still trying to make sense of what happened to you when all of your valuable things are gone. And you said, you created a way for me to walk through, come out of my room. So what you did actually benefited me. I don't see it that way. But before, that was what I was told. So I cherished it. And so when I came here first, I didn't see anything wrong. Yeah, this is a perfect system. And so it was great for me. But I think once I began to, all of these things happen, I realized how much trauma that I was carrying. And this is not like, say, oh, trauma in terms of the way I think people think traditional psychological kinds of trauma where you will need counseling, you need things. But I realized that epistemically, the knowledge form upon which my socialization was built on through education in even churches and all kinds of stuff were rooted in this, you know, cognitive injustice framework that framed the narrative, not to help me see how I have been disadvantaged, how I have been robbed of not only, I think, my humanity, but my identity, my cultural sense of being in everything, and just to reject everything about me and to accept the fact that, yes, colonialism brought me Christianity, it brought me civilization, it brought me this. And so everything that you continue to do under the Euro-American modernity, it's for my benefit, you know. And so I think once that occurred to me, when I figured it in that perspective, I think it gave me a new surge and a new drive to be able to look at what it is that I should have gotten in my education authentically that I didn't get. And so I began, it was unfortunate that a lot of these things started close, you know, I was right about to even towards the end of my PhD. And so now I'm still on the journey, you know, decolonizing some of the things that I have, you know, learned over the years. I am now beginning to deconstruct them so that I will be able to, through the different ways that I am understanding things, I can reconstruct the way that I think knowledge should have been presented to me as I was growing up, and how that should have shaped the way I think and how I relate to people around me, people that are both Africans and non-Africans. I think it's important. So that's, I think, a little bit of the journey so far.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned so much, and all of it was great. The latter part of what you were saying focused on you still on a journey to decolonizing your education and your experiences. You mentioned how that process of being socialized and being formed in Ghana traumatized you educationally. And when you went to America, some of those things became a little bit more salient in your experiences. Now, let's talk a little bit to the person who's the, let's say the 16, the 17, the 25-year-old that's in Ghana or even somewhere else in Africa. And they're hearing about this stuff for the first time, particularly around decolonization and colonization. And let's stick in the context of Ghana. They're saying, you know what? The way that we are in Ghana, it would have been better to stay colonized by the British. And the stuff that you're saying was so long ago that it doesn't impact me now. We all know that it does, but let's break it down to that level. Let's talk about how that legacy of colonization is still prevalent in today's society in Ghana. What are some of the ways that it's prevalent?
I think some of the way that is prevalent, that you can see that And it's now, I think I look, it's more like, when I was talking about the cultural trauma, the way it's prevalent, most Ghanaians in particular, and I think across even other Africans, because I interact with different folks and other kinds of stuff now, I see that we tend to equate like success to association with white people, association with the Western world. That's one. The other one is now the average Ghanaian, the names, the local name that we have, that's one way. You ask the average person, sometimes they don't know what is the Ghanaian name and what does that mean. So, names are historical archives, so names are things that when you mention somebody's name in the way that the culture was, their name can instantly evoke a particular, event that occurred, or something that is in the family lineage, or something that is within the community, or something that had happened. It could be good or bad, and all of those things. Or you mention that name, that can bring you a memory of maybe an ancestor who was in a family who passed, but possessed certain characteristics or qualities. So those things just all the time makes history easily accessible and available to shape identity and stuff. But now we are gradually not finding meaning in any of these things. That's another way that you see that thing impact us. Then the other thing is this notions about dependency on Western foreign aid and all kinds of stuff. You have this, when you think of the average person, it's not everybody, but most people, even including me, before I came here, the idea was, oh, if I travel, man, all my worries and my things are over. I'm going to be like, everything is going to be great. I have some friends, who still, sometimes I tell them some issues and they don't believe. I remember I had this particular guy, he said, even if he will ever step foot on American soil and die, he will be satisfied. As soon as he gets to America and he dies, he will be fulfilled. And then you have this idea also that if you can, only be well or do that well, you have to travel, Then even in church, most of the time when somebody wants to give you prophecy, you will travel, you will fly business class, you will get a visa. It's there, okay? And then the idea that even if God is going to bless you, God is going to give you a helper who is a Westerner, who is like, who is of European descent. It's like when I was growing up, and in most of the areas, like most now, and when I was in middle school or even elementary school, anytime you will see that most of our old mothers, grandmothers are in a rush to go to church, like oftentimes this Catholic church, I'm going to church, Father is coming today. Father is coming today. That means a white person is showing up, so they are going to get blessing. They're going to get this. So there's this urgency with which we react when we think about foreigners or people who are in there. And even us, like, I remember literally when I had, I came home, and after school, some of the way that even my own family, I think the kinds of the reception they gave me and everything. So I thanked them and I said, I really appreciate you for this. But some of them, I had to reject it because it doesn't. So, and one of the things that I said is that the fact that if I've traveled or I've been here, that doesn't mean that I should come and turn upside down everything that exists that I knew culturally. And so I don't need to take up the position of the elder in the family because of the fact that I have a PhD or I have this thing, or, some people call it, you have this certificate that is a white man's approval. But I think as a character, but So I see this even in families, even among sometimes friends, people all the time, everybody think that I'm here, I have a lot of money. So I get a lot of people, both family and outside family. Everybody think that I'm so rich. I should come and buy a house, build a house, this money, bring that, this school fees. Even it's that. So these are all the same mentality that it's a sign of the legacy of the colonialism, because